Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it, Depeche Mode, the podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another episode devoted to the greatest band on the face of the planet. As always, if you want to email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. If you are checking out the podcast on YouTube, you can leave a comment there and find out more about My Nerd World and the other podcasts that I do at mynerdworld.net. I know sometimes my fandom of Star Wars and Depeche Mode sometimes makes a connection with you who listen, who are also Star Wars fans. So you can always check out my Star Wars weekly podcast on whatever podcast platform you're currently listening to Depeche Mode, the podcast, on. Just search for My Nerd World Star Wars. You'll find it there. This week, I'm sharing my thoughts about The Bad Batch, Season 3, the latest episode that dropped earlier this week. Also, my thoughts on Dune Part 2, which was fantastic. Just an amazing film, and its similarities to Star Wars. So if you're a fan of science fiction and Star Wars, go and check those out. And of course, if you're a fan of science fiction and you like to read, I'm also an author, along with being a talk show host. So I hope you will go and check out my EMBARK science fiction series, available on Amazon. Details available also at mynerdworld.net. I titled the podcast this week A Question of Time because it's going to be a relatively shorter podcast. There's not a lot going on news-wise as we come to an end of the Memento Mori era. We're winding down over the course of the next several weeks. Still no details on the potential special release of Memento Mori with those 4 unreleased tracks, maybe a box set, or the live physical release of the tour yet. And of course, once that information comes out, I'll be sure to share it here on the show. But as I was doing research for the show this week, I stumbled across an excerpt just recently posted a few days ago, taken from the Mojo article where they spoke with Dave Gahan and did that extensive expose about Memento Mori. The portion I'm going to read from you, again, which was reposted just a few weeks back, I had shared before on the show when it initially came out ahead of the release of Memento Mori. Upon a reread, I realized that there's some things that jump out to me, and kind of doing a reflective look back on the Memento Mori era now that we've had this album and listened to it as many times as we had. So I thought for the show this week, I would share again this excerpt from that older article and share some new thoughts that I haven't shared before, and get to a few of your emails, listener feedback this week. Dave Gahan interviewed. We had to find a way of becoming friends. Dave Gahan speaks to Mojo about the loss of Andy Fletcher and how it ultimately brought him and Martin Gore closer together. The loss of Andy Fletcher in 2022 robbed Depeche Mode of their Mr. Dependable and posed big questions about their future. In this extract from Mojo's 2023 cover feature, Dave Gahan reflects on the role Fletcher played in the group and how his passing ultimately brought him and Martin closer together. Now, see, I found this interesting, again, reflecting on the tour, and as most of us have seen the tour now, many of you several times, it's clear that relationship between Martin and Dave has been on full display. And I don't know if I'm reading into this. I don't know if you feel the same way, but having watched the band perform as many times as I have, either live, the 34 times I've seen them live, or the hundreds of times I've watched the physical releases of the tour, Dave always connected with the band in a live setting. It appears to me, though, and again, this could just be my injecting, into this. It has seemed more genuine and more authentic to me on this particular tour than it has on other tours. And of course, when you get to the interviews, the many interviews that Dave and Martin have done over the course of the past year, I think it's also abundantly clear in those interviews that there seems to be a genuine love that these two individuals have for another that perhaps wasn't shown nearly as much or wasn't as prominent in those past interviews during other album eras. The Mojo excerpt goes on. Dave Gahan refers to Andy Fletcher as the captain of the ship. James Ford, the producer of the band's new LP, Memento Mori, and Depeche Mode's previous 2017's Spirit, calls him the rudder. Mute boss Daniel Miller describes him as the positive pessimist who kept the others grounded, especially early on. It's still not quite real that he's gone, says Gahan. You work with somebody like this for over 40 years, you know everything about each other and nothing really. It's a weird relationship, people in bands. Gahan says he soon realized that it was Gore who would be in need of the most support. I felt a sort of protectiveness, he says, with quotes. And also that Gore's loss of Fletcher would require Gore and Gahan to look at their own relationship, a relationship that had not always benefited from Fletcher's well-meaning intentions. Martin had lost his champion, someone who would always fight for Martin, says Gahan. If there was ever a disagreement over a song or a part, Fletch would sit me down and would be, effing is Dave, Martin and I have been talking. That really got old. Why won't Martin tell me himself? And that's where we kind of got to on the last record. The sessions for Spirit, says Gahan, were marred by tensions of this sort, to the extent that James Ford, on his first job for the band, was forced to draw the line. So in the end, James was kind of, I've had enough of this. I want everybody out of the studio. I just want Martin and Dave to sit in here, and we're going to talk about this. And Fletch didn't like that. He literally had to get manhandled out of the studio by our manager. I mean, kicking and screaming. I'm in the band. Why aren't I in this conversation? So Gahan and Gore had it out, minus Fletcher, and in the process realized their issues were more wide-ranging than they thought. Fletch's presence forced Martin and I to compete. We had these unspoken things, says Dave. Martin was like, well, you get this, and you can walk on stage, and everybody goes nuts, and I write the songs. Gahan, who has contributed songs since 2005's Playing the Angel, took up the gauntlet. Well, how many songs can I have then? Well, if there's 12, you can have 4 at the most. Fine. Now I know, right? So I won't bother writing 10. It seems a bitter irony that despite all his years devoted to keeping Depeche Mode together, a byproduct of Andy Fletcher's passing might be better relations between Martin Gore and Dave Gahan, and that's something that I wanted to key in on. I think Fletch's presence forced Martin and I to, maybe this is the wrong word, but compete, as was mentioned earlier, reflects Gahan. And it created a certain atmosphere of being a bit spiky. So Martin and I had to find a different way. We had to find a way of communicating, becoming friends. Becoming friends after 40-odd years together, years in a band together. Gahan smiles. Sounds weird, I know. One of the things I don't think that I talked about the last time I covered this excerpt from Mojo was, I'm personally a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. And I've mentioned with relation to this particular article and the tensions of spirit that I don't think any of us were really aware of because we haven't been getting the behind-the-scenes look at the creation of these albums since Delta Machine. And so I think I was as surprised as you were to find out that there was so much tension on Spirit. I know later on in this Mojo article, Dave ends up actually commenting on how it was one of the most difficult records they'd ever made, which is saying something considering that we all know the difficulties the band had when they were making songs of faith and devotion. And that being said, so much time between those albums, probably hard to say, comparative of the two. I have a hard time believing that Making Spirit was more difficult than Songs of Faith and Devotion, given where Dave Gahan was at that point in time in his life. But when you consider the fact that it was through the tensions of spirit and the removal of Fletch that Dave and Martin were able to sort out these issues that they hadn't sorted out, I don't think if that hadn't happened, I wonder if Memento Mori would have been made at all. Perhaps with the passing of Fletch, if they had gone forward on creating Memento Mori, what had taken place with James Ford, Martin, and Dave during Spirit may have ended up just happening with the creation of Memento Mori, having those conversations. But one has to wonder that if it hadn't been for the difficulties on Spirit, if we ever would have gotten a Memento Mori. Also, and I have talked about this before, but listening to the album again, where I'd gotten some distance from it, like we all do, I think we go through times when listening to Depeche Mode, you pitch off and listen to other Depeche Mode and then go back. I'd kind of gotten some distance over the course of the past month or so from Memento Mori, and only recently have gotten back to listening to it in its entirety as opposed to just selective songs. And I'm continued to be struck by how wholly unique the album is while still maintaining the spirit of Depeche Mode. And to me, this is Depeche Mode, but it clearly is Dave and Martin realized, which gives me hope that this won't be the end, as I've also talked quite so often on the show, that I think Dave and Martin found something unique in their creation of Memento Mori, that perhaps there still is the energy there, the drive and desire and curiosity to see what else they can make. Memento Mori is a different album. It really is. It is distinctly Depeche Mode, but it is truly, truly unique. I mean, even your more accessible songs like Ghosts Again to me stand out. I would compare it to Enjoy the Silence, and I find that both of those songs are companions to one another. But even then, there's a difference to it, and I think the inclusion of Richard Butler in the songwriting process has something to do with that as well. You get to a song like, Never Let Me Go, and there's a tinge of that track sort of aligning with other similar tracks on previous albums. Probably the one that I would closestly align with, a track on Spirit or Soothe My Soul on Delta Machine. So Much Love on Spirit. I think there's a kindred spirit between those particular tracks, but the rest of the album is very different. And Marta Solongni, James Ford, and their production and what they brought to it, especially on a song like Speak to Me, I think also makes that wholly unique as well. I'm excited, oddly, for what the future could potentially bring with Dave and Martin. My biggest question is less about whether or not we get more new material from Dave and Martin and more about whether or not we actually get another full-blown tour again like we did with the Memento Mori tour. That's the bigger question in my mind. I'd like to go back, and maybe on another episode I will. I have ideas for the show moving forward post the Memento Mori era, and going through particular tracks and, doing song breakdowns, and certainly time permitting and schedules permitting, because I do have a full-time job, and I do write, making sure that I can try to find time to schedule those interviews on the show that I so like to do, but just can't seem to fit into the into the schedule. That being said, I'd like to go back and sort of examine that era once again, dealing with not so much Dave and his drug problems, but sort of the similar circumstances that Martin and Dave had to go through when Alan left the band, and sort of the trajectory the albums ended up taking, whereas Ultra is so beloved by the fans, you move beyond that, and I know that's where the question marks begin to come in, and a lot of individuals' interest in those albums kind of fades away. People aren't as into those later records. I'd like to kind of get into those changes and how they took place. Clearly, Fletch played a role back then when Alan Wilder left the band, but I just find there's some interesting little similarities here and there between Alan leaving the band, a sort of post-Alan Depeche Mode and where they went, and then looking at the loss of Fletch and what we ended up getting with Memento Mori. As always, I'd love to hear from you, talkshownerd@gmail.com. And again, if you're listening on YouTube, be sure to leave a comment there as well. All right, it has been a slow week, so we only have a couple of items for listener feedback this week. First, we hear from Dave Fulton, who writes this. I suspect there might be a tiny bit of disconnect between the boys and the common man if they want folks to fork over $35,000 for a timepiece. This goes back to the watch story from last week. Let's face it, this day and age, a watch is purely fashion, and couldn't any black watch be a Depeche Mode watch? It's the DM completist collectors I feel bad for. You just sunk $3,000 for a signed 101 poster, and you think you'd die happy, and then Hublot, which I found out that's how you pronounce it, the internet lied to me, comes along and asks, do you know what time it is? Thank you for that, Dave. As a matter of fact, I need to do a quick shout out. I was beyond tickled last week after I released the episode that Dave Gahan's brother, Philip Gahan, on X replied to my podcast to correct me over my pronunciation of the watch company. So I was like, oh, hey, Philip listens to the show. That's cool. So thank you for that, Philip, and I hope that you are doing well. Friend of the show, Jason, Dave Fulton's obviously a friend of the show too, also writes in this week and says, listen to the latest show. Yes, that watch is an eye-watering $30,000, and I believe it's pronounced Hublot. The T is silent. Yeah, listen, the internet lied to me. I have this problem on my radio show. One of the things that I just really, really gets to me that I don't like to screw up. I don't like to screw up people's titles, right? The political positions, military positions, titles. I don't like to do that. And I struggle a lot with, individuals' last names. And again, my real last name is Logiudice. It's Logiudice. You look at it on paper or, wherever, and it's really hard to sort of look at it and figure out what the pronunciation is. The American version of that is Lojudas. I pronounce it the more Italian way of Logiudice. That being said, I looked up a Hublot, and that's what the little mouth on Google said it was. Hoblot, I think that's what they said. So anyways, thank you, Philip, for the correction, and Jason for the correction as well. And the question posed about the songs containing numbers, the following were missed: 2-minute warning, it doesn't matter, 2 and 1 caress, although Jason did write back to correct his email to me in stating what David had pointed out, which was the specificity of the songs that he was asking in his quiz from last week's show. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then you're going to have to go back and listen to last week's show to find out. So listen, as I said, a relatively shorter episode this week. It's a question of time. I got a lot of stuff going on. It's a busy weekend. So I do thank you so much for checking out another episode. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the other podcasts and get yourself caught up. It's always a thrill to hear from new listeners of the show who discovered the podcast and then go back to the beginning. I can't bear to go back and listen to older episodes. I don't typically go back and listen to my old stuff anyways. It's kind of like going back and listening to my shows when I first became a talk show host. I just simply can't do it. But I do get a broad smile on my face when I hear from those who have gone back to catch up with, see what I did there? The podcast, if this is the first time they are listening. Also, you love Depeche Mode, but if you do like to read science fiction, I hope you'll treat yourself, a friend, or a family member, and check out my science fiction space opera series. For those of you that have listened to the show before and know this spiel, thank you so much for checking the show out. I'll be back again next week. For you newer listeners to the show, my science fiction series is set in the future where air and space flight culture has replaced car culture. It is inspired in part by Depeche Mode, life in the so-called space age, the world we live in, and life in general. Depeche Mode does play a large part in the underlying themes of the story, and the main character himself is a massive Depeche Mode fan at a time when the music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story. The stories also feature references to Depeche Mode, both direct and indirect, while telling an exciting science fiction space opera saga. When I went to write this book, I wanted to know what it was like to be George Lucas, to create a science fiction space opera, having George be the first exposure that I got to that genre and becoming a massive science fiction fan because of that. Almost like watching Star Wars brought me to science fiction in a way that hearing Shake the Disease in 86 brought me to Depeche Mode. But again, I was also inspired a lot by Depeche Mode and the themes of what Depeche Mode writes. At the time when I was writing it, I was really into Ready Player One, and I used some of the means in which Ernie Klein crafted his pop culture references into Ready Player One. I used that with the music that I love, and specifically Depeche Mode. There are 7 books in all in the series, but the description for book 1 is as follows. Taft has found something, and humanity won't survive without it. With interstellar travel possible, Taft Guardia spent his days honing his piloting skills, preparing to one day travel the galaxy. But when an industrial accident inside a D-Corp civilian and military spacecraft factory sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, exploring the stars becomes a matter of survival. As the global evacuation begins, the ruthless Sin Argum of D-Corp threatens to destroy every vessel not loyal to his regime. Meanwhile, amid the chaos, Taft becomes unwittingly tied to the catastrophe when he recovers an advanced freighter and what may be the key to saving Earth's evacuees. On the run across the galaxy, Taft must unlock the secrets of what he's found if there's any hope of stopping D-Corp's evil leader before it's too late. After Earth ends, follow pilots Taft, Katha, and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for their future among the stars. You can check it out on Amazon.com or mynerdworld.net. If you like science fiction and you like an epic filled with romance, some pretty cool tech and action, EMBARK is perfect for you. I wrote it for adults, but I also wrote it in a way that it's perfectly appropriate for ages 11 plus. Pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, on Kindle ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. Again, Amazon.com, Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK, or mynerdworld.net. Again, thank you so much for checking out this week's episode, and we'll talk to you again next week. I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. Bye.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My nerd